Hello and welcome to my presentation. My name is Frank Plunkett. This is the final project presentation for Criminal Justice 7015, Criminal Justice Theory, Unit 10, Assignment 1 for Capella University in March of 2019. My topic is transgender persons in policing. A very important topic. Society has changed a lot over many years, and we want to do this project to help to identify how transgender persons are treated and dealt with within policing. Some of the research shows there's a lot of discrimination, still harassment. We want to address recruitment and retention issues and make some recommendations for change. The theoretical frameworks that are important to keep in mind at this point are organizational frameworks, as noted in one of our previous textbooks at Clell and Miller. How do organizations respond to this issue? Can they involve various teams as part of the agency to get involved and study the issue? How do people within the agency help to bring about change? Another theoretical framework we'll look at is the idea of transphobia by Mizak and others, and looking at the fact that there are a lot of people in society who pretty much because they don't understand what a transgender person is or where they come from, there's a lot of fear. Now, it's something very different. Transgender people make up only like 0.05% of the population in this country, and certainly much less in our police departments around the country. We want to look at recruitment and retention issues that have been studied, and workplace discrimination as per Jones and Williams. Also want to look at some of the work of Panter, Crispin, Berger, Graham, Dalton. They told us that there were, again, 0.05% of the general population are transgender people. As you can see, what we have displayed here is a transgender flag. It's a little bit different from your LGBT flag, which was displayed in the United States in the opening portion. Other issues that need to be addressed and were addressed in the full paper, the idea of discrimination and harassment. So some of the literature told us about issues involving transgender people not even been able to be hired. And prior to, say, the 1980s, there's research that tells us that not only transgender people, but there were issues with other members of the LGBT community, lesbians, gays, bisexuals, as well as transgender people not being hired into law enforcement careers. One of the things mentioned in the paper was that there was a court decision that banned sodomy laws in the state of Texas, and that those sodomy laws had been used as a way to keep at least gay men from becoming police officers, because obviously sodomy was an illegal practice. If you're a gay man, you might very well practice sodomy. So you couldn't become a police officer because you were committing an illegal act, probably on a regular basis, if you were involved with someone, obviously. Also some discrimination with regard to promotion, certainly issues with regard to retention. If someone was gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender and they're being harassed on a job, it's very possible that they're not going to stick around. There was a study mentioned in the paper just recently done in New York State, actually New York City, where it was in 2017 by the Comptroller's Office of the City of New York, and they sent out surveys to over 400 people in the city of New York to find out, how they felt in the workplace. And it was very interesting to see the data where you had almost 50% of people coming back and saying, they weren't able to get a job even, or felt discriminated in their workplace. Very interesting information. So obviously, if it's happening in for all people living and working in New York, transgender and regular LGBT people, imagine in a police department. Promotion, retention, and general treatment. If someone is treated like they're an outcast within their own police department because of their gender identity, that is certainly an ethical issue that needs to be dealt with by the agency. Other ethical issues are accommodation for transgender persons within the agency. What bathrooms do we allow them to use? If a transgender female who has not had a full gender reassignment surgery, that person still has all of the male parts. Should they, since they're identifying as a female, going to be able to use the women's bathroom and locker rooms? And are the other females going to be comfortable with that? And how do we deal with it? This picture, incidentally, that's here, was of a college who's basically changed their locker room into all genders in the locker room, so anybody can use it. So they dealt with the issue where they didn't just say people who are transgender could use whichever one they identify with. They opened a locker room so that anyone, and obviously they have separate showers, changing rooms, but your locker could be next to anybody. So maybe police departments could do something like this, although it would be a little awkward if you have an entire shift, as I was a police officer coming in, and in my agency we had a locker room that was probably as big as one of those little alcoves that you see off to the right, and we were pretty much on top of each other. And we didn't have female officers at that time. When I first came on, we didn't have female officers. We didn't have to worry about where to put the females. But much later on in my career, when we finally did hire some female officers, then it was like, okay, what do we do with them? Well, there was a bathroom that was adjacent to the locker room. That was then, okay, and if they put a lock on it, and they said that's where the females can change in that. It was a rather large bathroom. I think it was handicap accessible. So they made it the female changing room. It certainly wasn't big enough to be a locker room, but at least for that time being, it was a changing room. Much later on, as the number of female officers grew, I don't think it ever reached more than 4 in an 80-person department. And presently, I think there's 3. Unfortunately, there were 4 up until last November, when one of the young ladies took her own life. But getting off the topic a little bit, what we did in the agency was, during a revamping of the entire property, a locker room was installed for female officers. So what would be done as far as the practices so that you don't have people bumping up against each other, people being uncomfortable, potential for inappropriate behavior, touching, whatever, because that can certainly happen as well. And what do you do about it? In smaller police departments, it could be a big problem. If you have an agency, some of these agencies, data shows us that police agencies around the country most of them have less than 10 people. So your locker room could be very small, and your budget could be very small as well. And how do you install these new facilities that you need to accommodate these new officers? Or do you just say, well, we don't have any place for you, so we can't hire you? Dress code issues. The dress code I would address. You see, I don't know if I should show me on this slideshow, but the dress code issues. Generally, as you can see in the slide, we have what appears to be a woman here, but of course we're talking about transgender people. Who knows? Where this picture, they just said it was a college locker room that's open to all people, and you see what appear to be 2 young men and a young woman. But from a police perspective, women have traditionally been permitted to wear their hair long, where men had to have it cut relatively short. Women, when they were on the street, had to have it either cut. Some agencies allow it to be cut to the shoulder length. If it was longer, they have to have it put up so it's out of the way. And if you're having transgender people come into your department, what then is the appropriate dress code or grooming code for that person? So do we allow transgender female to now wear her hair however she likes, as long as she put it up like the other women? And if we have a transgender male, so a female to male person, are they then required to wear their hair short because they're identifying as a male? And as you can probably guess, it gets a little confusing in all of these. And then also the dress code, what are you going to allow your transgender detectives, your transgender female detectives? Hopefully, if they're pushing for their female identity, most people want to quote unquote pass. In other words, want people to be able to see them as the gender that they see themselves as. But what's the dress code? Is it shirts and slacks for everybody, or shirts and some kind of polo shirt, as a lot of agencies are going to now, kind of like a dress down everyday mode? Or should they be able to dress however they want? A skirt and a blouse and a jacket. That's something that has to be addressed as well. And paperwork and name changes are going to take place in the department. Name change, obviously, if Officer Gene Smith decides to become Officer Joe Smith, then their ID card has to be changed, all the paperwork has to be changed, the medical insurance. There's all these things that have to be dealt with. And the department, the main thrust of our discussion here is the department has to have policies that address that, and they have to move towards those policies to address it. Diversity, inclusiveness, very important part of this discussion. Again, I think this is the third time we repeat this, but it seems to be relevant, is that transgender people make up just 0.5% of the population. And this is through a few studies that were cited in the paper, showing this both in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and other places in the world. It's pretty much the same average. The United States is actually higher in the percentage than other countries, as I recall. But they're also going to be a smaller part of the police population, considering that transgender people and other LGBT people, for the most part, as they go out in the working world, many start to gravitate towards major cities. So you may find more there, like in the city of New York, which has a fairly large population of LGBT people. And there are a couple articles that were cited in the paper, and they are also all of the sources, of course, are at the end of this slideshow that you can peruse on your own. But one of the issues as far as diversity is inclusiveness is that if you are part of a very small minority population, there is a much greater chance that people are not going to understand you, that people are not going to be welcoming to something that they don't understand. And this is maybe a little bit more complicated to understand than racial and ethnic issues. People, of course, there may have been a time when the first black person showed up in a predominantly white community, that maybe that was something people didn't understand. And that's another thing that we can look at when we're trying to make policy with regard to dealing with a minority such as transgender people, is how did we do it in the past? Diversity, inclusiveness, again, all of us have a need for acceptance. We have the need to feel welcome, need to feel valued. These are common desires for most people, and it's really no different for people in the transgender community. They just want to be regular folks. They want to fit in. They want to be part. A person becomes a police officer because they want to be a police officer, not because they want to fly the flag for transgenderism in the police department. Somebody wants to be a cop because they want to be a cop. Whether you're male, female, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, whatever you are, they want to go in there and they want to do the job. They don't want to have for the most part, don't want to have the transgender flag flying over their head. or have it on their police car, like when the pizza shop goes by. They don't need to be readily identified as, oh yeah, that's the transgender cop over there. No, they want to be identified as the cop when they're in the police department. So just like everybody else, just like anybody who desires to be an officer, I myself was one for many years, and that's all I wanted to be. I don't want to be like called out because of any specific, yes, the Irish guy, or whatever. I don't have any, obviously being your average white male, don't have a whole lot of things that are different from the officers in my agency during the time I was coming up, but certainly transgender people too do. Of course, when I came up in my police department, when I first joined, there were no African American members in my police department. And as time goes on, those folks were hired and joined the agency. Now, I would say we were pretty progressive in my suburban community, so that wasn't a big deal. I remember the one officer, a good friend of mine who just retired recently, I remember when he came just to, I think for like an internship, and he was assigned to my unit because I was in a special unit, and said, hey, take him for a ride, because I was doing bicycle patrol at the time. So we got a couple bikes, and me and Corey Jones went out for a ride. And then we did some other things, so, and it was not a big deal for me. It's always just a black guy. But, there's many fewer transgender people than there are black people in our community. Like, compare the data. General population United States, 13% African American. Transgender people, 0.05%. Let that stick in for a moment. Think about that. But again, we all desire to fit in. These people want to be valued, they want to be accepted, and they want to do the job. So how do we help them do that? All right, how do we help them? Agencies have to work to create an inclusive climate for all people. So yeah, this is a unique and a new thing for some agencies. Certainly, if you look at major cities, it's not terribly unique. New York City instituted policy changes over the last, say, 6 to 10 years. And again, there's articles, newspaper media articles that address that issue at the end in the references. But there's some places where it's very new. If you go out in the Midwest where maybe they don't know too many gay people, they don't know transgender people, and then all of a sudden somebody applies to be a cop, and they say, well, who are you? Or the other issues, the other probably more difficult issue is that person who joins the police department and then decides it's time to transition. And that makes it more difficult. Certainly there's plenty of case histories, case studies of adults who have transitioned at work. Some of them have gotten full support. They have to do a little research ahead of time to figure out, okay, how am I going to address this? I need to know everything I need to know about changing names, about changing insurance, about all kinds of different things, because in a lot of cases, research tells us that HR departments don't know what to do. HR departments are sometimes surprised if the first transgender person comes to them and says, okay, I want to transition, and this is what I want to do. And in some places, that's actually covered by the medical insurance, but your HR department might not have a clue. They might not know whether it is or not. So they're starting from scratch. So a lot of people in their coping skills, transitioning within the workplace, plan ahead and find out everything they can, so that when they go to their HR department and say, okay, this is what's happening, HR department says, well, what? They are able to then inform them. In agencies that are coming up with new policies, one of the things, as I said before, is we have the experience from the past with racial minorities. We have experience from the past with other LGBT people, the LGB part of it, lesbian, gay, and bisexual. This week was the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in New York City, where lesbian and gay people were trying to make their mark, trying to make sure they were recognized and were treated the same as other people. And that's 50 years ago. 50 years ago. And also just announced this week was that the Congress is trying to pass a new Equality Act. that would give every person in the United States protections in their job, from harassment, from crime, no matter what, anywhere in the United States. It's important to note that there's, I believe it was like 20, there's 20 different states that do not have protections in place for lesbian, gay, or transgender people. Fewer or more that don't have for specifically for transgender people. And so, there's a gay marriage issue that's passed. The Supreme Court decided it was okay a few years back, but there are other issues that people are not protected. So the Equality Act, the goal is to protect everyone across the board, which is going to help a great deal with this idea of transgender people in police departments, because now that just like when the Supreme Court when the Supreme Court struck down the Texas sodomy law, which then opened the door for gay people, gay men specifically, or anyone who was doing that type of behavior could now become police officers. So this Equality Act is going to open the door that, hey, you can't discriminate against somebody because you don't have a locker room for them. So that's going to be very important. But we have that past experience dealing with other types of people, creating new policy. So to me, this really is not that complicated an issue, because we have prior experience of dealing with people that we weren't aware of. But it's going to take a lot of work, which we're going to address in a moment. Police policy must require all persons to be treated with respect and fairness. And that goes across the board. Again, the Equality Act is going to require that mandate, that on a federal basis, assuming that it is passed in the Congress and in the Senate, and then that the president signs it. So we'll see. Considering that at this point in time, the administration is banning transgender people from participating in the military, who knows whether the president may decide to veto the Equality Act because it's contrary to their military policy. But of course, the military policy is still being fought in the courts, so we shall see. Team structuring and functioning. Again, with how my paper was written, team structuring and functioning fits in certainly, and one of those things is, how do we develop a new policy? How do we look at how this should be done? And that is building a team with a diverse group from inside and outside of the agency. Because maybe your police department doesn't have all the people on board that are familiar with this issue, as in the Riverbend City Police Department in another course, where we had a scenario where you had an officer that wanted to transition, and the chief said, hey, we need a policy now, and we need to educate, we need to train. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about here. And what they did there is reached out to a diverse group of people that were active in the LGBT community, people that were involved in equality organizations, various organizations, religious organizations, people across the board, diverse. So you want to get people involved, certainly the ones that are going to bring the flag with them and say, yeah, we want to support this person 100%. But you also want to bring the guy or gal from the religious group down the street or the conservative group down the street who may have some issues with this, and try to coalesce this group to work together towards a solution. And of course, they're going to work, and there may be some banging of heads initially, as certainly we can see, whether it's in our Congress or other places where these types of issues come up. You have some people with some very strong feelings on these issues. But I think the bottom line is that people are people. We are all human. And, regardless of what person someone wants to identify with as far as gender is concerned, and there's a lot of science now coming out backing up that, these are not crazy people. Matter of fact, if you look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual from the American Psychological Association, it used to be classified as a mental illness, and now it's just what they call a condition. And if you look through that book and you look at the conditions, we all probably have one. So, those people that scream, oh, these people are mentally ill, they shouldn't be cops. That's not true. If you have a person who may have some other mental issues, obviously you screen for them. That's all we do, a psych exam in the police department. And you're going to find if there are other issues that might be preventative. But this team has got to make those recommendations to agency leadership. Leadership has to review those recommendations. And of course, you can adopt them out of hand, or the chief could look at it and say, well, I don't like this part, I don't like that part. Maybe throw it back to the committee or team to redevelop or change things. And then you have this team who helped you to build your guidelines to then help you develop policy, develop the training program, and any other pieces that you need to get this transition, this change done within your agency. All right, more on team structuring and functioning. And you like my little bicycle slide here. Here we have an issue. We have, I have a tandem bike that my wife and I used to ride. We haven't ridden it so much anymore. But you see here is 4 people on the same bike. It may be more. This picture's just shot really close. But imagine if someone wasn't pedaling, or someone was trying to pedal the other direction. That's going to cause problems, and your team's not going to function properly, which is why the team obviously has to coalesce. And your entire police department as a team, and the squad of people that might work on a certain day of the week as a team, your detective squad, your SWAT team, whatever, all have to come under and get the education and then follow these new agency policies and all work together and treat everyone with fairness. So we're going to have, as part of this change in our agency, anti-discrimination policies. We're going to have a structure to require compliance, and we're going to have an enforcement of that structure. We're going to have this both before and after your compliance and enforcement education and training. Obviously, if you're coming out with new policies, you're not going to turn around the next day and start enforcing those policies without having provided notice to the membership of what those policies are. So my slide is a little bit out of order. Education and training probably should come before the compliance requirement and enforcement. Although sometimes the agency will put out a memo from the chief's office or for whoever is responsible for certain areas to say, okay, as of today, we're going to operate this way. And sometimes the training and the guidance doesn't come until afterwards. So depending upon the agency, this could be in the right order. And so we're going to have those teams, the structure of the teams, and the training and education and all of that built so that we're going to be inclusive to all the persons, to everyone. So let's say, the transgender officer transitions, starts, let's say it was male to female as the scenario in the Riverbend City scenario in the previous course. That person transitions from male to female, but in the police department, just as in the military, people that are in a regular patrol on duty capacity, we're all wearing the same outfit for the most part. I don't know if there's too many police departments now that have their female police officers out on the street in skirts. So, maybe detectives, depending upon what the dress code is, although a lot of the folks I'm seeing are dressing more practically and they're wearing blouses and slacks. So somebody who's transgender is not going to stick out as much, trousers and slacks or pants and slacks, blouse and slacks, than someone who's deciding to wear a skirt. But police officers on the street, for the most part, we're all wearing the same costume. But that officer maybe they're wearing earrings if department policy allows females to wear earrings, jewelry, which many do not. So they can't wear them on duty, but some departments do because of the possibility that if a female has pierced ears, you don't wear your earrings, the ears close up, so they get to wear at least small ones to hold the holes open. So now if your officer who was, like I said, Ralph Schultz last week, and now is Raylene this week and comes in wearing a wig that's longer because they want to feel more female, and they're wearing sticks in their ears, we have to have our team ready to accept that person. Our team has to be prepped so that they're ready to work with that person. And granted, this could be a long, arduous task, because if you're in an agency that has a diverse religious, social, ethnic structure, you're going to have people who may be dead set against having a person of this type working with them. But they have to realize, of course, you know what, this is part of the job. And you have to be able to work with anyone. You know, to me, as a police officer myself, it seems it ought to be easier to accept these people, because when you're out in the street, you're running all kinds. So if you're dealing with these people out in the street, why can't you deal with them in your own agency? Now, I will tell you, as a police officer, the first time I was introduced to a transgender person was many, many years ago. It was my first like three years on the job. I think I was out with another guy who was a more experienced guy, and you know, we weren't as nice back then to transgender people, unfortunately, and I had no clue. So we stopped this car. It has these two females in the car, and I think we must have had warrants on one, and we're arresting them. And to me, they were both females, and the one clearly had breasts, and I'm doing a back down with the back of my hand, and my buddy, it was really my buddy at the time with the other officers, it's a dude, which of course is totally inappropriate conversation today, because if someone's identifying as a female, we're going to address them as a female. The only other experience I had with transgender person that I was aware of on duty is when we went for a prostitution arrest. And unfortunately, this man had engaged two prostitutes at a local hotel, and they both appeared to be female. We arrested them. The one actually identified and said, well, I used to be a guy, but now I'm not. And they claimed they had the surgery, and they lied all about that. Of course, they also had 17 different names when we ran them. When we ran their fingerprints, they came up with like literally 17 different names. Unfortunately, we didn't check. When we took her to the county jail and they did their strip search at the time, or pat down, whatever they were permitted to do at that particular time, they found that this female who claimed that she had the surgery actually still had a penis. So then we had to take her to a different facility because they had their protocols. As to back in those days, there weren't three facilities, or I don't know where they might, if they had a special area within the male jail, but that person, we had to remove them from the female facility and take her to the male facility, which I'm sure was quite uncomfortable. But this was probably 25 years ago, something like that. So in our work teams, you know, the whole point of those two stories is police officers by nature, even in the community I was in, we had to deal with transgender people. And so it should not be so unusual for us to deal with them as coworkers. Of course, maybe it's, you know, if we look at them as people that we have arrested in the sex trade, or people that we've dealt with on the street, it's different than having them as your fellow officer. But it can't be. And that's what we have to, agency policy, the anti-discrimination policy, the compliance and enforcement, and of course the education and training, bringing these people up to speed to who these people are, why they're who they are, why they identify, how they identify, and drumming in the need for acceptance of these people. All right, some creative solutions. And I think we kind of addressed some of the creative solutions. There's a lot of overlap in this. And one is addressing, how do we address the transgender officer? And this comes from Collins in 2015, was actually a monograph on the International Association of Chiefs of Police website. Certainly not an academic article, but this one and Human Rights Council both provided some really, really good recommendations that were certainly supported by the research and the background from officers in the field on how they would have liked to have been dealt with. And so what do we have to deal with? Anti-discrimination policies, compliance and enforcement. Again, recruitment and retention strategies. You know, one of the things that was in one of the research papers used as a source for this particular assignment, again, looked at the recruitment and retention strategies before the court decision outlawing sodomy or banning the sodomy law, and afterwards. And they looked at Texas and Georgia, because Texas and Georgia apparently both had sodomy laws. Both of those were struck down by the Supreme Court. So they wanted to see what the practice was as far as, among other things that they were looking at, recruitment and retention. Were they actually trying actively to recruit people from the community? And that should also be part of your practices. You know, we're always talking about in law enforcement, people always say that the department should reflect the community served. And we're usually talking about that with regard to racial and ethnic minorities. But it stands here. Now, it's a little harder when you have a group that makes up 0.05% of the population to go out and find them. But as you will see at the end of this slideshow, if you choose to look it up, there's a video from the Portland Police Bureau. And in that video, there's at least 3 transgender officers. It's a combination of lesbian, gay, and transgender people, but I believe there's at least 3 of them in Portland, which is, you know, a relatively small city. Again, I talked about grooming and dress policies. Part of your solutions is to make sure that you modify those policies that are going to accommodate how these people now identifying as a gender that they were not born with. Of course, that's not the right way to say it. People in the transgender community talk about being male assigned at birth or female assigned at birth. So someone who is male assigned at birth and now wants to transition to be female, we need to have the appropriate grooming and dress policies that are going to allow them to express themselves as the person that they are. And certainly, you know, police departments are very conservative for the most part as to how people dress on the job. So, you know, female police officers are generally restricted from, again, the amount of jewelry they're wearing, makeup, and all those things. They're usually supposed to be, you know, fairly plain, you know, just maybe a basic foundation. So your transgender female officer shouldn't be treated that much differently. You know, maybe if they still have, you know, some strong male features and that they want to make sure that they look more female, maybe their makeup is a little bit stronger than your average female police officer, but that's got to be addressed in a policy of what they can and cannot do. And again, solutions, human resource issues, this has to be clear in your new policy. How do we address the paperwork issue? How do we deal with the name changes? And of course, it's fairly simple, I think, as far as the name change, but the department has to decide. Is your officer going to be permitted to use a name that they choose before they have it changed legally? And to give a little anecdotal base, my child, who I've identified in class previously as a transgender female, went to Rowan University in southern New Jersey and had not had her name changed. But Rowan has a policy that allows you to change your paperwork and your ID card and everything for the college to whatever name that you choose to use to represent your gender. And Rowan still had some issues to work out, like with the mailroom. You had some issues where people would send packages to my child in their male name, and because the ID now said the female name, the college ID, the person in the mailroom wouldn't give them the mail. Kind of crazy. They needed to address that, which they ultimately did. But how does your police department address that? Will the officer's name tag read the name that identifies with the gender that they are identifying with, or will it read the name that identifies with what's on their birth certificate or on their legal documentation? Many states allow you to change your name as long as you have documentation from a physician. So they're suggesting that it is a medical condition that you have a brain that tells you that you're one gender and a body that suggests that you're another. But once you have that documentation, like state of New Jersey, we went through that last year. You get the letter, you go to court, you file some papers with the court, the judge reads it, and then changes your name. And then, of course, you have to take that issue and deal with all kinds of other agencies like Social Security, your driver's license, medical insurance. And so the human resource issues, the agency is going to have to determine where is the point where those things are going to happen. All right, again, so creative solutions, very important. The education and training can't be stressed enough. You have to put together a really good training program for all of the members of your agency. And maybe it's broader with regard to LGBT, but LGBTQ, but your officers have to be aware that, we are a diverse agency and we have people that come from all walks of life. And, it might be, depending on how you want to work it, where you identify who these officers are. My feeling is that should only be done within the individual units that they work in. If you're in New York City and you're working in Manhattan, does some cop, working in Brooklyn have to know that, down walking on Wall Street is a transgender cop? I don't think so. But the person working in Brooklyn has to know that they may encounter a transgender cop. They don't have to know who it is. They just have to, because you see a cop's a cop. So it shouldn't matter who it is. But the education training should be there so that people know to expect what they may run into so that they're not surprised. I don't really feel they should be surprised in today's society, but in some places and some people have a long way to go. And one of the ways to verify this, and there was an extensive section in the paper with regard to verifying whether any of this stuff actually works to change people's perceptions, to change people's behavior, to change how people address other officers. Now, one of the methods was a pre and post testing within the training sessions. So do a survey at the beginning of the training session, determine what people's attitudes, what their knowledge is with regard to, say, LGBTQ or transgender people in the agency. And then you do one at the end of the training, kind of like you do a test at the end of the training, to determine if those attitudes, in addition to the information that they may have learned, did their attitudes change. Other parts of this check of efficacy, if you will include surveys of the officers, the LGBTQ officers, down the road to see if they've noticed any change in how they are treated by other officers, and maybe periodic surveys of the entire agency to make sure everybody's still on board. You may do focus groups around the city. If you're in a big city like New York or a smaller city like Philadelphia, maybe you do some focus groups to kind of take the pulse of how things are going. Community engagement is also very important. The community needs to be aware that people in your agency come from all walks of life. There was an agency just a few years ago that started allowing I think New York actually did this, but there might have been another one, but allowed its Sikh officers to wear the turban on their head. And a lot of people don't understand what the turban's all about, but it's part of their religious beliefs. And Sikh men don't cut their hair. You see, I haven't cut my hair in a while, but Sikh men for like their entire life, I believe, or at least from when they become adults, don't cut their hair. So the hair could be, down to their ankles, depending upon the person. But the turban is where they put the hair. And obviously, your police baseball cap or your 8-point or 5-point hat that some police work agencies wear is not going to hide all that hair. Sometimes women can pull it off by putting it up in a bun or something, but a Sikh man, their hair down to their ankles, kind of behind our hide. So, agencies allowed that, but they had to then tell all their other officers and train all their other officers that, hey, you may see one of your cops wearing this hat that you've never seen before. So the same thing, or even the community. You know, you may see an officer walking the beat in your neighborhood or driving by in a car or on horseback. Of course, I don't know if they have to wear a helmet while they're on horseback. It's probably hard to wear the turban, but or on a bicycle or motorcycle or whatever. You know, so that's another interesting thing. Policy's got to cover that. If a person is permitted to be, I'm sorry, my hair is backwards in the screen here, so I can't fix it properly. But policies to cover all those potential issues. So for transgender person, can't think off the top of my head what it might be, something that comes up out of the blue on the street, because everybody's pretty much wearing regular uniforms. If they're, and doesn't matter what they're engaged in, they're all going to pretty much fit in. It's just that their genders, and you can't tell anyway. If they're wearing a uniform, you can't see what parts they have, right? So, and if you're wearing a vest, even females, the vest covers up all kinds of stuff there. The other thing is to help the officers learn better is to engage the officers with the entire community. You know, let the officers go to community meetings, have officers in various areas go to the local LGBT group, go to the ally group, and meet some of these people. And that's going to help them to better understand officers in their own agency as well. All right, this last slide, and I'm assuming it's better not to play this right now, but there is a link at the end if you want to go and watch it. It's like 10 minutes. And obviously I was presenting this live somewhere. This is where I would present this video, but this is the Portland Police Bureau. We have a variety of officers introducing themselves and talking to their communities about being lesbian, gay, or transgender, and issues that they had in their own lives and how they fit in to the police department. So this is the last slide before my references. So I want to thank you for your time in watching my presentation. And certainly I would also obviously have a Q&A portion at the end. So people who are watching this presentation could pick my brain, but obviously that doesn't work very well when you are recording it and sending it off. So thank you very much. And my references, there's 3 pages worth of these. And some of them obviously are newspaper reports. Annie's is New York provides clear guidelines on how transgender cops can inform their superiors of their preferred pronouns, names, etc. And this is from 2017 that New York Police Department had created this policy so that the officer could tell their supervisor, this is what I want to be called. Archibald was something we used in another class about women in policing, kind of relevant. Beyond the binaries, talking about the history and where people came from and when they started to appear and those kind of things. Talked about police hiring and retention. This was actually cited. This is about the Georgia and Texas after the Supreme Court decision, Lawrence versus Texas. And this is from 2009. I think they did that. This is the IACP document that I was talking about. It's actually from Police Chief Magazine, Transgender Employee Considerations. So it helps to understand how to deal with that population. Demographics, a sample of US adults. This is basically, I dug up some data to help understand. That's where I got the 0.05% is one of the sources for that data. And more about Title VII and how whether or not it protects transgendered employees. It's an article about how people felt about whether they were accepted in a conference for criminal justice professionals. Organizational behaviors is one of our textbooks where some of the ideas about organizational behavior come from. This is an important study. Jones and Williams is actually cited in a slideshow and cited in the paper where, and this is what you would base the survey on. What they did is they took officers who were on the job for 20 years or more, lesbian, gay, and bisexual officers, and surveyed their experiences in workplace discrimination in England and Wales. And we have a typo here, so I should fix that before I send this up. And then this study, again, workplace experiences of gay and lesbian criminal justice officers in the United States. There's interesting information also cited. Mizak, Woodrum, Riley, Sotilio, Jung, and Omerad. It was about transphobia, which we discussed earlier in the slideshow. Panter, very good resource. Again, Panter wrote a book on the topic, which pretty much covers everything that I wanted to address in this research. Very interesting. Portland Police Board. This is the video. Here's the link for the video if you want to watch the entire video. This is another story from the New York Times. And this was actually about multiple transgender officers that work for the New York City Police Department. And then what happened? Froze. EEOC recognition of Title VII as prohibiting discrimination based on transgender identity. So this tells us that, you know, the EEOC suggests that people cannot be discriminated based upon their identity. And this is just talking about people in the community that people never heard of who were trans. Inclusion in the workplace. Again, this is the Human Rights Campaign. And this is another link you can take a look at. Provide a lot of really great suggestions on how people could deal with employees and how employees could deal with their employers.